Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the CTO Club podcast with me, Sam Baker. Today we'll be discussing the growth of artificial intelligence and its impact on the technology market with Abhi Anantharaman, the CTO of Syndigo. First of all, I'm just going to pass over to Abhi to introduce himself.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Again, I'm Abhi Anantharaman. Originally, I come from Bangalore, India. I've been in the United States for over 20 years, and I've worked at Morgan Stanley, Amazon, Popular, and now in Syndigo. And my transition has been from an engineer through a technology leader, and more recently as a chief technology officer at a couple of companies. I hold a master's degree at Carnegie Mellon University and a bachelor's in engineering from India.
Awesome. Thank you for your introduction. So, as I said, we're going to be talking all things AI today. So let's dive into that. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was your opinion on what you see as the most transformative trends in AI at the moment, and how do you think it's shaping, various different industries across the board?
Yeah, I think the last 2-3 years, it's been an explosion of AI in the market, right? Particularly, it's gone from being a very niche science, which required specific skill sets, to almost being a commodity, right? Like it's commoditized, it's service-based, and it's literally in every sector, in every, the applications are just endless. So from that sense, it's transforming, people who use it effectively are finding a lot of gains, but there's also a lot of noise that it's creating. So in some sense, how do you cut through that noise to the effective ways of using it? So these are all still evolving trends. Now there is the advent of agentic AI, which is sort of using AI, which uses AI, you kind of use it in a nested way. You give a more abstract problem as opposed to a very specific input, and the agentic AI systems are just throwing back some amazing results. So it's a super exciting space, and we are right in the thick of it, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I think obviously as a lot of companies now are starting to go down that route of integrating some sort of AI in whatever they're doing generally, that's obviously for some companies very new. So, if you were in a CTO in that position, how would you advise a company to approach, integrating AI into their business processes, especially, I guess, those who are just starting that journey?
Yeah, it's a very important question, right? It's almost like for a lot of companies, it's an existential question. Customers want to know what you're doing with AI, what your strategies are, and eventually everybody wants to know how it's going to affect their world, right? So my experience as well as advice is we start with the customer first, particularly looking at our product offering. How does it make a customer's life better? Is where I would start first, particularly if you are, a smaller organization, a lot more nimble, you have a lot more tactile feeling to what your customers, how you add value to a customer organization. So the better for you. If you are more removed from it, then it might be a little bit more difficult. But regardless, for most SaaS companies and software companies, you start with the customer, look at your fit into the product, and then you work backwards from that for what is the sequence in which you would like to bring it on. Because like I said in the previous response, there's a lot going on and there's a lot to choose from. So in many ways, figuring out that product fit and specifically what would you want to pilot with, and do you have some customers you can test the theory and whatnot. And once that concept is finalized, then it comes down to resourcing and your budget. And then even further, as you gain maturity, like how do you address things like data privacy? How do you understand your legal obligations and the legal setup with your customers? Then pricing and packaging and whatnot. So, and I'm sure we'll get into those in the further questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think following on from that, you're obviously mentioning customers' requirements. Do you think the customers now being a little bit more stringent with products that they're using in the AI space? As you said, there's been a big boom of companies who are making AI-based products, and a lot of them are I would say, fairly similar in what they do.
Yeah.
And I think obviously the really good, successful ones are the ones that stand out and add something different. So do you think now that the customers maybe doing a little bit more due diligence around what that product actually does and how it's implemented?
Yeah, in some sense, I look at it as breaking of the ice, right? Sort of a parallel is also how a lot of companies accepted cloud as a platform, right?
Sure.
And it's not exactly a parallel, but it's I feel it's very similar in trend. There was a lot of apprehension, but cloud didn't really threaten too much other than just be a little bit disruptive in terms of how you manage your infrastructure. AI is a whole other paradigm, right? Because customers can be sensitive to both data privacy of what aspect of their data is just going to get out there because they have their obligations with the regulatory authorities or with their own customers. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is intellectual property and the competitive edge that each company has, and the risk of that getting out into a generic, LLM, and that data particularly being exploited. So that is also a big threat. So definitely, customer organizations are very sensitive to which AIs we use as SaaS companies and how their data is going to be used. What are we going to do about their data protection? So that's a big concern for customers. Having said that, there's a lot. It's becoming more commonplace. A lot of I'm seeing more and more contracts are kind of like, I wouldn't say boilerplate just yet, but still getting a lot more standardized in terms of AI usage and whatnot. Everybody's kind of accepting that most vendors or most SaaS companies would have some sort of an AI footprint. So they're getting a lot more comfortable with at least starting off that conversation. I would say even a year ago, that was not necessarily the case. You had to go through a lot of hurdles even to just have the conversation.
Yeah, and I think they're probably more comfortable having those conversations now. They understand it better as well, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that obviously from their
And
side is
moreover, yeah, sorry. Moreover, like enterprise companies are investing in their own AI capabilities as well. So from that sense, that awareness is also increasing.
yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously from a company standpoint, maybe a company that are looking to develop and deploy their own AI systems in their own environments. What ethical considerations do you think they should prioritize when doing that?
I think there's two aspects to it, right? So from an ethical standpoint, it really comes down to originality of work, particularly if you're a company that produces content. How do you maintain the transparency for what is the human element in your offering, right? Again, it's a bit of it's a bit of a landmine, right? We already have a lot of legal challenges of what is considered intellectual property, what is considered like what can I actually defend in court as my copyright, if there is any perceived infringement. So there are already very challenging legal situations. From an ethical standpoint, I would say it really comes down to using somebody else's content, and there's this whole gray area with, oh, it came from an AI, but what is the source? Is it legitimate for a company to take advantage of that? If the source is not really getting the credit for it. So I feel those are the areas, and this might become a lot more prevalent, particularly as if you're using the visual and the more graphical elements of AI, because that's really where it gets even more creative. Of course, the literary aspect is similar as well, but I feel that's really where the ethical challenges would be.
Yeah, and I know there's been more challenges around the training of LLMs with books and
Exactly.
things like that, and they've
Exactly.
caused lawsuits and things like that, and similarly with people's voices and actors and actresses' voices and stuff like that. So yeah, it's an interesting paradigm that they're going to have to try and work through eventually.
Yeah. And the extent to which the it feels so real. Like just yesterday, I was going through an output, which until I was told, I couldn't guess. It was a regional set of poetry that was fed into an LLM, And what came out was an apparent critique of that entire body of work, which is not even in English. And
Right.
it was a male and a female voice discussing extremely intricate details, and like it was actually people's voices. It wasn't like an AI generated one. On the one hand, it's super exciting. On the other, very scary. So, but it was amazing to see. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the power some of them have now is incredible. So it is interesting to see how it's going to develop further, I think. And I think it probably coincides with my next question, and certainly from your position as a CTO in general, and obviously from my position as a recruiter. So I've obviously seen the demand for AI talent over the last 2 or 3 years go through the roof. How do you feel that organisations build or attract the
Yeah.
right kind of AI talent to be innovative in that space?
I feel it's definitely AI has become a lot more available, right, to many companies since it's become so commoditized. So what that has done is definitely it's increased the interest and the demand for getting educated on it. But having said that, it's no longer a niche science where you just had a like it was a very difficult science to break into, where like you need to be in machine learning or artificial intelligence and very specific bespoke skill sets, and a lot of times requiring super advanced degrees and in those fields like neural networks and things like that. But with the commoditization, it's a lot of like, how do you use it? So to your question, it really depends on how the organizations are building their AI capabilities, right? Are you an organization that requires to build your own research science and data science teams that would need to train their own models, or even if you want to take existing models, like there's plenty of open source models that you want to just take and tune it, right? Even that requires a lot of knowledge of curing data sets and tuning the models, and specific bespoke tech stack knowledge in terms of the platforms you want to run your models on, Python if you really want to start changing code. So it comes down to how do you want to bring this into your organization. Again, there's the product element and the productivity element. I'll speak more on the product element first. And from that sense, if it is more about bringing in AI models into your product suite, can you actually have people who are knowledgeable about it and who can effectively bring those models into your organization, versus you're an organization that really needs to build and tune your own models? And that's kind of how you would need to make that distinction before you go to market to look for the talent.
Absolutely, and this probably coincides with this question as well. So talent being an issue, I think, as you said, it's become like quite widely available in terms of open source AI and a lot of other kind of areas that can be used, and there's probably a lack of really good AI engineers who've actually focused in that area. So when an organization is scaling AI solutions, I guess from like a pilot situation to an enterprise-wide implementation, what challenges do you kind of foresee them having?
Yeah. When it exploded on the market, the initial challenge was a lot of people, including our own organization, we weren't prepared for it. So in many ways, that at that point in time, it was how are we going to sort of, without nuking my roadmap, I still need to make progress, right? So right now the challenge is different. I think everybody expects to have some sort of an AI piece in their innovation investment. From that sense, they're better prepared. But once, let's say, we have a proof of concept and you have a successful product suite, then productionizing that starts getting very complicated really fast, right? So it comes down to both in terms of how do you scale that product, like, and if you have tested with a few customers, how do you start getting more comfortable where all your customers, if not bulk of your customers, are comfortable with it? Because do you make it an optional feature? Do you need to start planning for that existence of a version of your solution that doesn't have AI? Because some customers might want to say, I want to entirely opt out of it. I just don't want to have anything to do with it. So that starts creating some interesting problems for product development. to maintain those two different versions of your product. And then it comes down to how do you package it? How do you go to market with an AI version or not? Is it an add-on? Is it like I mentioned, is it an optional feature? And then once you start packaging it, how do you price it, right? And then who's going to be willing to pay? How will you charge it? Now, all that obviously need to be fed in from what is it going to cost you to begin with, because that is a massively changing landscape, depending on your cloud offering, or are depending on the service provider, depending on which models you use, what is the cost for you per use. That cost model is changing very rapidly. So, and it can, and if you want to throttle it, if you want to have some sort of a platform cost, then how, what kind of mechanisms do you build to make sure that you're going to stay within that? Because most customers would not want just, I can't give a ceiling for it because they can't work on their budgets. So if you really offer some sort of a slab model in pricing, how can you stay within those slabs? So all these are challenges for most organizations, particularly once you start scaling it out. And then there is the legal angle as well. Coming down to, particularly if your offering did not have any such element, then all of a sudden the volume of your contracts that need to be revisited to bring in this feature, or you may need to declare them as sub-processors, which is an obligation you might have to your customers. So it starts getting complex. So my recommendation is plan for it and then sequence it, and then you work backwards from it. Ensure you have the go-to-market collaterals, whatever campaigns you want to run with. Then needless to say, your competition is likely doing the same thing. So if you need to stay ahead of it, how do you plan for all that? So it's starting off with an AI, I think, might actually be a very low barrier for entry, but productionizing requires a lot of thought and planning. So I would strongly advise, plan ahead, way ahead.
Absolutely. And I think from like a wider view then, and from your position as a CTO, how do you see AI innovation generally in terms of sector? Do you think there are any specific regions or sectors in the business world at the moment that AI is probably going to have more of an effect on?
Yeah, the specific sector that I'm seeing out of the gate right away is sort of the more interactive pieces, chatbots and customer service related sectors, or anywhere you can reduce the volume of tickets or requests requiring human input. I think that's an area in general where that was kind of first mover. The second one is more on the sort of the co-pilot features where it's more assist, right? Like you're creating content, you're even from the aspect of you're writing code. Most offerings, most SaaS solutions have an click here for an AI assistant feature, right? So that's the other area, and that kind of it's pervasive. I'm not seeing it specific to a particular industry sector. It's just across the board. When you talk about the region element, there are some slightly more distinct lines depending on where certain models are available, what is the sophistication of those models in certain regions. That is not yet as pervasive and as consistent. Because a lot of the training of these models and how they run depends on compute power, and that is not necessarily uniformly distributed globally. So from that sense, I'm seeing, and then there is particularly the more we move into non-English speaking regions, the language element becomes big. So a lot of the LLMs that are more attuned to those non-English languages, so those are all the bespoke specifications where it's not as generally available. But from a sector and usage perspective, content generation, chat kind of features, any kind of assist features, I'm seeing it very prevalent. The my exposure personally to the area which is not as prevalent is on the more visual elements, particularly how AI has been adopted, particularly from a go-to-market and commercial perspective for visual and more graphical generation. I'm seeing a lot of images. Of course, we see a lot of deep fakes, and it's unbelievably real. But is that actually making money? Is that commercial? Or is that more like on the side? That I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the interesting things you mentioned then was companies using, co-pilots for writing code, which kind of leads me into my next question, with how you see, AI potentially reshaping certain workforces, especially on the software development side, particularly, I think. So, what skills do you think is going to become essential for engineers, but probably more so, and software engineers in general, in a kind of AI future, as this kind of continues to develop and get bigger and bigger?
Yeah, I think there's a big temptation, particularly in my sector, in the technology sector, that AI is going to make people's jobs easier and faster. It is true to a large extent, but it comes down to the effectiveness of how we can use it. Now, particularly if you have, I do see some broad strokes in terms of you have like super old code that's not been touched for a long time. Would an AI be able to help create a suite of test cases and improve your coverage? Um, Intuitively, you can argue, sure, yes. But on the other hand, is it automatic? Can I just generate it and just run with it? But what is the human cost of validating? Are those the right tests, and are they testing the right features and whatnot? So that's really where I feel our effectiveness in using AI as a force of improving our productivity, I feel is imperative. We have to do that. Now, the caveat or the pitfall here is when we talk to other stakeholders of, is this actually going to, there's a lot of metrics out there. AI increased productivity by, a big percentage, let's say 30% or 40%. Does that mean the workforce reduces by 30 or 40%? My answer is no. You can expect your workforce to, sure, you'll expect efficiencies and economies of scale, but you'd also expect more productivity from your workforce as opposed to cutting your workforce. And that's really where there's a lot of conversation, which starts, immediately getting people on the defensive. So my advice is to take a pragmatic look at how do you use AI for productivity gains, and more as a tool to do your job more effectively, as opposed to seeing it as a threat.
Absolutely. And then I guess my final kind of technically related question, obviously with AI and how, big it's grown and it's getting bigger, obviously, how much weight and emphasis do you put on cloud infrastructure, and what role does that play in kind of supporting AI workloads in general?
I think it's very, very big, particularly because cloud infrastructure gives us the ability to scale, right? Obviously, it's a facade, right? Behind the scenes, the cloud providers, they are running physical hardware. But what that does is for operators like me, is it takes that equation out of the consideration, right? Like, so I don't need to really think about the particular hardware footprint that I want to have in a data center. So, and it gives me interoperability, it gives me a lot of flexibility, and sort of moving from a cloud provider to a, and or rather even distributing across multiple cloud providers. All these become real possibilities. And when it comes to, as the models get more and more sophisticated, as they demand for more compute power, that scalability is just very difficult to plan if you are operating solely out of a data center. Now, having said that, there are, a case can be made for specific types of models, specific use cases where we have certain specific requirements, either in terms of hardware or scale, or you have a need to run things within a certain set of parameters, whatever they might be. And then you are able to operate your own data center at scale and at a manageable cost, then sure, you can. But I think for by and large, for SaaS companies, particularly for smaller companies that want to, try something on and bring something to market, cloud, I think, is going to be very critical.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that insight. And I guess my final question would just be to kind of see what you think the future holds, really. So I guess, if you were to predict what the trajectory of AI will look like over the next decade, what kind of breakthroughs or challenges do you expect to arise?
I feel AI is an innovation like akin to it's a generational one, right? It's here to stay. My view is like the GPS, like the cloud, which is taken for granted today. I think AI is going to be commonplace over the coming decade. I guess everybody's like it's difficult to say what are all the things in which you will have an AI. We could over rotate and pretty much stick an AI in everything, and that's probably where it might start getting annoying. But I certainly feel that from an enterprise perspective, the more we are able to bring in, it all comes down to usability. As far as AI goes in making you use your products more effectively, reduces the load on you, reduces the cognitive load, increases the value and usability. As long as we are doing that, it's just going to keep growing. And I don't think there's going to be any restriction for which domain or which sector. I feel it's here to stay in a very big way.
Okay. Well, really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on and sharing your insights. And hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.
No, thanks for having me, Sam. It's a pleasure.
No problem at all. Thanks.